Have you ever felt a stranger's judgment based on nothing more than the color of your skin? For 17-year-old Jamal Hayes, a gifted cellist on his way to the most important audition of his life, that feeling was about to become a public spectacle. In the chaotic heart of an international airport, one gate agent's baseless accusation would ignite a firestorm. What she didn't know was that Jamal wasn't just any teenager, and the passengers in line weren't just passive observers. They had phones, they had a sense of justice, and they were about to record the moment her life unraveled. This isn't just a story about a viral video. It's about the devastating real-life karma that follows an act of pure prejudice. The air in Terminal C of O'Hare International Airport hummed with a unique kind of organized chaos. It was the sound of 1,000 hurried heartbeats, the rolling thunder of countless carry-on wheels, the distant garbled incantations of gate announcements, and the low, anxious murmur of people going somewhere or fleeing something. For 17-year-old Jamal Hayes, it was simply background noise, a symphony of transit he'd learned to tune out. He stood with the ramrod-straight posture his cello instructor, Dr. Anya Petrova, had drilled into him since he was 6. It was a posture that radiated a quiet confidence, a stark contrast to the nervous energy rippling through the crowds around him. Tucked under his arm was a well-worn leather portfolio containing the sheet music for Bach's Cello Suite No. 1. Its pages filled with his own frantic, meticulous annotations. His other hand rested protectively on the handle of his most precious possession, a sleek black carbon fiber cello case that contained a 19th-century French instrument he affectionately called Gaston. Gaston was his voice, his confidant, his key to a future he'd spent his entire life building. Inside that case and inside his mind was a ticket to the prestigious Aspen Music Festival and School, a summer program that was a direct pipeline to the world's finest conservatories. This wasn't a vacation. It was the final audition. It was everything. Jamal checked the gate number on his phone for the 10th time. G14. He was early, another habit instilled by his parents. His father, Dr. Alistair Hayes, a cardiothoracic surgeon, lived by a creed of precision and punctuality. To be early is to be on time is to be late. He'd say a mantra that applied equally to open-heart surgery and cross-country flights. His mother, Dr. Lena Hayes, a professor of literature, believed in preparation of a different sort. She had packed his carry-on with noise-cancelling headphones, a copy of James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain, and a bag of his favorite sour gummies, a small comfort from home for the journey ahead. He was a young black man traveling alone, a fact that for him was as unremarkable as his brown eyes. For his parents, it was a source of carefully concealed anxiety, addressed through a litany of reminders. Keep your ticket and ID somewhere easy to reach. Be polite even if someone is rude. Call us the moment you land. Jamal understood their worries, rooted in a world they knew better than he did, but he carried himself with an earned sense of belonging. He was an honor student, a nationally ranked youth musician, and a citizen of the world. He belonged in this airport, in this line, on this flight. He found gate G14 and took a seat with a clear view of the boarding podium. The sign for Starlight Airlines Flight 821 to Denver was illuminated the word "on time," a small welcome blessing. He watched the gate agents, a man and a woman, as they worked. They were a flurry of activity, typing furiously, speaking into phones, and placating a stressed family whose connecting flight had been delayed. The woman whose name tag read Brenda seemed particularly frazzled. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her face was a mask of strained professionalism. Her smile when she offered it didn't reach her eyes, which darted around the waiting area as if scanning for threats rather than passengers. Brenda Matthews was in fact having a truly abysmal day. It had started with a flat tire on the freeway, followed by a dressing down from her supervisor David Chen about her recent customer satisfaction scores. "The numbers are down, Brenda," he'd said, his tone infuriatingly gentle. "We need to see more positive interactions, more empathy." Empathy. Brenda scoffed internally. It was easy for David to talk about empathy from his quiet office. He didn't have to deal with the endless stream of entitled, demanding, and often clueless passengers who treated gate agents like personal servants. He didn't have to enforce baggage policies that changed every 6 months, or explain to a grown man why his oversized personal item wouldn't fit under the seat. On top of it all, her ex-husband had called that morning to say he was taking their 2 children on a surprise trip to Disney World with his new younger girlfriend the weekend Brenda was supposed to have them. The news had landed like a punch to the gut, leaving her feeling powerless and insignificant. Now, standing at the podium for Flight 821, every passenger looked like another problem waiting to happen. Another person with demands and expectations she was too emotionally drained to meet. Her patience was a thread worn down to a single frayed strand. At 10:45 a.m., a voice crackled over the intercom. "Good morning, passengers. We are now ready to begin the boarding process for Starlight Airlines Flight 8221, with service to Denver. We would like to invite our active duty military members, families traveling with small children, and any passengers requiring special assistance to begin boarding at this time." A small group shuffled forward. Jamal remained seated, running through the opening bars of the Bach suite in his mind. The notes were a familiar comfort, a sacred space he could retreat to amidst the noise. 5 minutes later, the second announcement came. "We now invite our first class and Starlight Priority members in Group 1 to board. Please have your boarding pass and ID ready." This was his cue. Jamal stood up, his movements fluid and unhurried. He slung his carry-on over his shoulder, grabbed his portfolio, and began wheeling Gaston toward the now forming line. He was the 4th person to join the queue, standing behind a businessman, talking loudly on his phone, and a couple in their 60s dressed in expensive-looking travel wear. He pulled out his phone, displaying the digital boarding pass his father had forwarded him. It was clearly marked First Class Group 1. He was focused on the screen, his thumb hovering over the QR code, when Brenda Matthews's voice, sharp and accusatory, sliced through the air. Excuse me, sir." Jamal looked up, momentarily confused. Was she talking to him? The businessman in front was still on his phone, and the couple was busy chatting. He met her gaze. Her eyes, cold and blue, were fixed directly on him. "This line is for Group 1 boarding only," she said, her voice carrying an unmistakable edge of condescension. She didn't move from behind the podium, forcing him to acknowledge her from 10 feet away in front of everyone. A small, quiet part of Jamal's brain, the part that had listened to his parents' warnings, flickered to life. He kept his own voice, even polite. "Yes, I know," he replied clearly. "I'm in Group 1. Brenda's lips tightened into a thin, skeptical line. She scanned him from head to toe, her gaze lingering on his hoodie, his jeans, and the imposing cello case. Her mind clouded by a storm of personal resentment and subconscious bias processed the image not as a young musician, but as a kid who didn't belong. A kid trying to game the system. She had seen it 100 times, people trying to sneak into the priority line to get on early, to snag overhead bin space. And today she had no tolerance for it. None. "The Group 1 line is for our first class and premium status flyers," she said, her voice getting louder, drawing the attention of those nearby. "Economy boarding hasn't started yet. You'll have to wait for your group to be called." It wasn't a request. It was a command, an ejection. The fragile calm of Gate G14 was about to shatter, and the single frayed thread of Brenda's patience was about to snap. The air around the boarding lane grew thick with unspoken tension. The businessman in front of Jamal ended his call abruptly, turning to glance back. The elderly couple fell silent, their eyes wide with curiosity. A low murmur rippled through the dozens of people seated in the waiting area. They were no longer staring at their phones or reading books. They were watching a scene unfold. Jamal felt a hot flush of adrenaline creep up his neck. This was the exact scenario his parents had feared, the one he had always dismissed as unlikely. He was being singled out, publicly challenged. But panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Panic would make him look guilty. Panic would be a betrayal of the composure he prided himself on. He took a slow, deliberate breath, just as Dr. Petrova had taught him to do before a difficult passage. "Ma'am, with all due respect, my ticket is for Group 1. He repeated his voice, still steady, though he had to consciously keep it from trembling. He held up his phone, the screen bright with the QR code and the words "First Class." Brenda leaned forward, squinting at the phone from behind the counter, as if it were a foreign object. She didn't ask him to approach. She made him hold his position, turning him into an exhibit. "I need to see the pass," she snapped her tone, implying he was hiding something. "Bring it here." Jamal walked the few steps to the podium, the squeak of his cello case wheels suddenly deafening in the charged silence. He held out his phone. Brenda snatched it from his hand, her fingers brushing his with a shocking coldness. Her eyes scanned the screen, not for information but for a flaw, a discrepancy she could pounce on. "Dr. Alistair Hayes," she read aloud, her voice dripping with triumphant scorn. She looked from the name on the screen to Jamal's face. "This isn't your ticket. This is a stolen pass." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and venomous. It was no longer about a boarding group. It had become an indictment of his character. Stolen. The word echoed in Jamal's ears. "That's my father." Jamal explained, his patience wearing thin, but his voice still controlled. "He booked the flight for me. My name is Jamal Hayes. It's on the passenger manifest linked to this seat. If you check my ID." "I don't need to see your ID." Brenda's voice cracked like a whip. This was the snap. The frayed thread was gone. All her frustration with her job, her ex-husband, her sinking life found a target in the calm, composed young man standing before her. "I know exactly what you're doing. You kids think you're so clever. You find a discarded boarding pass or screenshot one, and you think you can just walk onto a plane into a $500 seat. Well, not on my watch." She was shouting now. Not just raising her voice, but shouting. Her face was red, a vein pulsing in her temple. Her colleague, a younger man named Kenji, looked over with alarm, but he seemed too intimidated by her fury to intervene. "I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the line and wait until the end of boarding." Brenda continued, her voice ringing through the terminal. "We can sort this out then, and if this pass is fraudulent, we'll be handing it over to airport security." Jamal was stunned into silence. He felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, judging him, suspecting him. He could feel the heat of their collective gaze. He was no longer Jamal Hayes, the cellist. He was a potential criminal, a kid being put in his place. It was in that moment of public humiliation that the dynamic shifted. A few rows back in the waiting area, Sarah Miller, a 28-year-old travel vlogger with a modest but growing YouTube channel, had been watching the exchange with increasing disbelief. Her entire brand was built on authentic travel experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This, she realized, was profoundly ugly. Her instincts, honed by years of capturing content, took over. She discreetly raised her phone, shielded by her backpack, and pressed record. The lens focused on Brenda's contorted face and Jamal's stoic but clearly distressed profile. 2 people ahead of Jamal in the now stalled priority line. Robert Henderson, a 55-year-old corporate lawyer in a crisp, dark suit, turned around fully. He wasn't a man who suffered fools or tolerated injustice in or out of a courtroom. He observed the scene with a practiced, analytical eye. He saw the gate agent's irrational rage, the boy's calm demeanor, and the clear digital boarding pass still clutched in Brenda's hand. He recognized it for what it was, a gross abuse of authority, fueled by prejudice. "What seems to be the problem here, Miss?" Henderson asked, his voice calm, but carrying an authority that made Brenda flinch. Brenda turned her glare on him. "This is an official airline matter, sir. Please mind your own business." "This young man is in the same line as I am," Henderson retorted, his voice hardening slightly. "His standing here affects my standing here. It's become my business. You've accused him of theft in front of at least 50 people. That's a serious allegation. Did you in fact check his identification against the passenger manifest, as he suggested?" Brenda was momentarily thrown. The lawyer's precise legalistic language was a wall she couldn't simply shout down. I don't need to. The name on the pass isn't his." "It's common practice for a parent to book a ticket for their minor child," Henderson countered smoothly. "It's also common practice for a gate agent to verify a passenger's identity, not publicly accuse them of a crime. Perhaps your supervisor would agree." The mention of her supervisor, David Chen, was a direct hit. But before Brenda could formulate a response, another voice joined the chorus. It was a woman named Maria, a nurse from Chicago, who had been sitting near Sarah. "He's just a boy," she called out, her voice filled with maternal indignation. "Look at him. Why are you treating him like this?" Suddenly, the dam of silence broke. Other passengers began to murmur their agreement. "Yeah, just check his ID. This is ridiculous. Let the kid get on the plane." More phones came out. Not just Sarah's professional-looking setup, but a dozen others. They rose from the sea of waiting passengers like periscopes, their small red recording lights, blinking their lenses all aimed at gate G14. The sound of the terminal hadn't changed, but its focus had narrowed to a single point, the podium where Brenda Matthews stood, her authority crumbling under the weight of a dozen digital witnesses. She was no longer in control. The situation had spiraled into a public trial, and she was the one in the dock. Her face, which had been red with rage, began to pale with panic. She looked from the lawyer's unblinking stare to the sea of phones, and then back to Jamal, who stood his ground, a silent, powerful anchor in the storm of her own making. The world she knew, the little kingdom of her boarding gate, was turning against her, and it was all being recorded. The sight of the recording phones was like a bucket of ice water thrown on Brenda's fiery rage. The anger didn't vanish, but it was instantly eclipsed by a chilling wave of fear. These silent, gleaming lenses were transmitting her face, her words, her loss of control out into an unseen world where she had no authority. She was no longer just Brenda Matthews, a stressed gate agent. She was becoming a character in a story she couldn't control. Her supervisor, David Chen, must have been alerted by his other agent, Kenji, or perhaps drawn by the sheer spectacle of it all. He appeared at the edge of the podium, his face a tight mask of concern. David was a man who prized smooth operations above all else. A commotion at the gate was his worst nightmare. A commotion involving shouting a crowd and recording phones was a Category 5 hurricane. "Brenda, what is going on here?" he asked, his voice low and urgent, trying to contain the fallout. This passenger," Brenda stammered, gesturing toward Jamal with a trembling hand. "He's trying to board with a fraudulent pass. It's not his name. I was handling it." David ignored her. His eyes, trained by years in customer service, took in the entire scene in a fraction of a second: the steely-eyed lawyer, the indignant nurse, the wall of phones, and at the center of it, the impossibly calm teenager. He turned to Jamal, his demeanor shifting instantly to one of solicitous apology. "Sir, I am David Chen, the station supervisor. I am so sorry for this confusion. May I please see your boarding pass and a form of identification?" His voice was the epitome of professional courtesy, a stark and damning contrast to Brenda's screeching. Jamal, seeing a lifeline of sanity, finally retrieved his wallet. He handed David his high school student ID, which featured his photo and full name, Jamal Hayes. David took Jamal's phone, which Brenda was still holding like a piece of evidence, and his ID. He turned to the computer terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the clicking of the keys. Everyone waited. Brenda stood frozen, a statue of dread. Sarah Miller kept her phone steady, zooming in slightly to capture the supervisor's face. Mr. Henderson crossed his arms, his expression that of a man who knew the verdict before it was read. After 15 seconds that felt like an eternity, David looked up. He turned first not to the crowd, but to Jamal. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice clear and formal, filled with an unmistakable deference. "My sincerest apologies. You are indeed ticketed in seat 3A in first class. The ticket was purchased by Dr. Alistair Hayes, and you are correctly listed as the passenger on our manifest. It seems we have made a terrible error." He handed the phone and ID back to Jamal with an almost reverent care. Then he turned to Brenda. His voice dropped, losing all its warmth. "Brenda, step away from the podium. Go to the break room. Now." It was a quiet, brutal dismissal. In front of everyone. In front of the phones. Brenda's face crumpled. The last vestiges of her authority, her dignity, evaporated under the harsh terminal lights. She gave Jamal a look, a toxic cocktail of hatred, humiliation, and disbelief, before turning and walking away. Her retreat was not the defiant stride of a wronged employee, but the shuffling gait of the utterly defeated. The crowd watched her go, a silent collective judgment. David Chen then turned to face the line of passengers, his public relations smile firmly back in place. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We will now resume boarding for Group 1. Please have your passes ready." He then looked directly at Jamal. "Mr. Hayes, please right this way. Allow me to personally escort you onto the aircraft." It was a calculated act of damage control, but it only highlighted the severity of the initial offense. As Jamal walked past Mr. Henderson, the lawyer gave him a subtle approving nod. Jamal, feeling a surge of gratitude, nodded back. He followed David down the jet bridge, the hushed whispers of the other passengers following him like a wake. Stepping into the serene, quiet cabin of first class felt like entering another world. The flight attendant, a woman with a warm smile, greeted him. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Hayes. Can I get you something to drink before we take off? Orange juice water." "Water would be great." "Thank you," Jamal said, his voice raspy. He found his seat, 3A, a spacious leather pod by the window. He carefully slid his cello case into the dedicated closet at the front of the cabin, placed his portfolio and backpack in the overhead bin, and sank into the plush seat. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving him feeling shaky and hollow. He had won. Brenda had been put in her place. The supervisor had apologized, but he didn't feel victorious. He felt exposed, violated. Her words still echoed in his head. "Stolen. You kids think you're so clever." She hadn't seen a musician, a student, a passenger. She had seen a stereotype, a caricature born of her own bitterness, and she had tried to impose that ugly vision of him onto the world. He pulled out his phone and saw a string of frantic texts from his parents. "Mom landed. Dad, call when you can." "Mum, everything okay, sweetie?" "Getting worried." He typed a quick reply. "Just boarded. Long story. We'll tell you later." "I'm okay." He wasn't sure if that last part was true. He leaned his head against the cool window, watching the ground crew scurry below. The incident was over, but he had a sinking feeling that the story was just beginning. He had no idea that a few rows back in economy, Sarah Miller was already connecting to the in-flight Wi-Fi, a determined look on her face. She had the footage, and she was about to upload it to a world that was always hungry for drama and always ready to pass judgment. Sarah Miller was not a malicious person, but she was a savvy storyteller. She knew the difference between mundane travel trouble and a potent narrative. What she had captured on her phone wasn't just a rude gate agent. It was a perfect storm of injustice, prejudice, and compelling characters. She had a clear villain, Brenda, a sympathetic and dignified hero, Jamal, and a satisfying if immediate resolution, the supervisor's intervention. Before Flight 821 had even reached cruising altitude, she was hard at work. Using a video editing app on her laptop, she stitched together the clips. She started with a wide shot of the gate, establishing the scene. Then she cut to Brenda's initial condescending shout, making sure the audio was clear. She juxtaposed Brenda's escalating rage with Jamal's unwavering calm. She included the powerful intervention from the lawyer Robert Henderson and the indignant cry from Maria the nurse. She made sure to capture the moment David Chen publicly corrected Brenda and apologized to Jamal. She left nothing out. The final touch was the title. A title can make or break a viral video. She toyed with a few options. Gate Agent Gone Wild was too generic. Rude Starlight Airlines employee was too bland. She needed something that conveyed the core injustice. She finally settled on one that was both descriptive and damning. Starlight Airlines Gate Agent racially profiles and berates black teen musician in first class. For the description, she wrote a quick, factual summary. This was the scene today at Chicago O'Hare, ORD, for Starlight Airlines Flight 821 to Denver. Gate Agent Brenda refused to believe this young man, a talented cellist, traveling with his instrument, was a first-class passenger. She publicly accused him of using a stolen ticket and shouted at him until her supervisor intervened. The dignity with which this young man handled himself was incredible. Share this to hold Starlight Airlines accountable. She tagged the airline, the airport, and several major news outlets. Then with a deep breath, she hit upload song. The video, 4 minutes and 37 seconds long, went live on her YouTube channel, Sarah's Skyway, and she immediately shared the link to her Twitter and Instagram accounts. For the first hour, it was a slow burn. A few hundred of her regular subscribers watched it. The comments started to trickle in. OMG, that Brenda is horrible. Good for that lawyer for stepping in. That poor kid. Then someone with a much larger following, a prominent activist and social media personality, retweeted her video with a single comment. "This is what flying while black looks like in 2025. This is at Starlight Airlines. Make Brenda famous." That was the spark that ignited the wildfire. By the time Jamal's flight landed in Denver, the video had 50,000 views. An hour after that, as he was taking a shuttle to the Aspen campus, it had crossed 500,000. News desks in New York and Atlanta were calling Sarah Miller, whose phone was now buzzing non-stop. Hashtags began to trend. Starlight Brenda. Flying while black. Gate G14. Brenda Matthews, meanwhile, was sitting in a sterile, windowless break room back at O'Hare, nursing a cup of stale coffee. David had told her to wait there until he finished his shift. She spent the first hour stewing in self-pity and anger. It wasn't fair. She was just doing her job. That kid had looked suspicious. The lawyer had no right to interfere. She was the victim here, ganged up on by everyone. Then her phone buzzed. It was a text from a co-worker on a different shift. "Brenda, are you okay? I just saw a video." Brenda's blood ran cold. Video. She opened her social media app. Her name, or rather the version of it the internet had adopted, Starlight. Brenda was everywhere. With trembling fingers, she clicked the link, and she watched herself. It was a profoundly surreal and horrifying experience. The video stripped away all of her internal justifications, all of her self-pity. It showed only the raw, ugly reality of her actions. It showed her snarling, her face twisted with a rage she barely recognized. It showed her pointing, shouting, and publicly humiliating a child. It showed her being dressed down by her boss and slinking away in disgrace. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol. "Fire her immediately. This is racism, plain and simple. I hope he sues her and the airline into bankruptcy. I have a face for every Karen, and hers is the new logo. Look at her face when the supervisor checks the computer. Priceless." Her personal information wasn't in the video, but this was the internet. Within 3 hours, digital sleuths had cross-referenced the flight details, the airline, and the name tag Brenda. They found her LinkedIn profile. From there, they found her Facebook page. Soon, her full name, Brenda Matthews, was circulating in the comments. Photos of her scraped from her public profiles were being turned into memes. Her world was collapsing in real time, pixel by pixel. Starlight Airlines' corporate office, now in full-blown crisis mode, issued a boilerplate statement on Twitter. "We are aware of a video showing a disturbing customer interaction at O'Hare. The actions of this employee do not reflect the values of Starlight Airlines. We are investigating this matter urgently and have suspended the employee pending the outcome." Suspended. Brenda read the word and felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. She had been with the airline for 12 years. It wasn't just a job. It was her identity, her livelihood, the source of the travel benefits that were her one perk in a life she felt was spiraling downward. Now that, too, was gone, sacrificed to the ravenous court of public opinion. She sat alone in the break room, the phone screen glowing with images of her own humiliation. The digital wildfire was raging, and it was burning her entire life to the ground. She was no longer a person. She was a hashtag, a villain in a viral video, a cautionary tale for the digital age. And the karma was just getting started. Jamal arrived at the Aspen Music Festival campus, feeling as though he'd passed through a strange, turbulent portal. The mountain air was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the stuffy, recycled atmosphere of the airport terminal. The campus was idyllic, nestled in a valley of breathtaking beauty, with the sounds of string quartets and soprano arias drifting from open windows. It was supposed to be his sanctuary, the place where only the music mattered. But the incident at Gate G14 had followed him. During the shuttle ride, he had finally watched the video. Seeing it from an outsider's perspective was jarring. He saw his own forced stoicism, the subtle clenching of his jaw, the way he stood his ground. He saw the naked prejudice in Brenda's face. He also saw the kindness of strangers, the commanding presence of Mr. T. Henderson, the impassioned plea from Maria the nurse. He felt a strange mix of gratitude and deep, bone-wearying exhaustion. His phone call with his parents was difficult. His mother, Lena, was frantic with a mix of fear and rage. "Are you okay? Did she touch you? We're booking a flight right now." His father, Alistair, was quieter, but Jamal could hear the cold fury in his voice. It was the voice he used when a surgery went poorly, a controlled anger that was far more terrifying than shouting. "Son, I want you to tell me everything that was said. Every single word," Alistair instructed. Jamal recounted the story, his voice flat. When he got to the part where Brenda accused him of using a stolen pass, Lena let out a choked sob. Alistair remained silent for a long moment. "Jamal," he finally said, his voice like flint. "This is not your burden to carry. Your only job right now is to focus on your music. Go to your orientation. Meet your instructor. Prepare for your audition. Your mother and I will handle this. We will handle Starlight Airlines. We will handle Brenda Matthews." There was a finality in his tone that offered Jamal a sliver of peace. He promised to call them every day and tried to put the incident in a box, shoving it into a dark corner of his mind. He had to focus. Bach was waiting, but the world wouldn't let him forget. By the next morning, the story was on national news. His name, Jamal Hayes, was now public. Reporters had somehow discovered he was a cellist auditioning for Aspen. The festival's administrative office received calls. Jamal was suddenly not just a new student, he was that kid from the video. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, Robert Henderson, the lawyer from the flight, was sitting in his corner office overlooking the Chicago River. He had watched the video go viral with a grim satisfaction. He believed in the power of the law, but he also understood the raw, unassailable power of public opinion. That morning he did something he rarely did. He reached out to a potential client. He found Dr. Alistair Hayes' contact information through his hospital network. When he called, he bypassed the secretaries and got straight through to the surgeon's private line. "Dr. Hayes, my name is Robert Henderson. I'm a partner at Winthrop & Cole. I was on your son's flight yesterday," he began. "I witnessed the entire incident at the gate." Alistair, who was already in talks with his own family lawyer, was intrigued. "Mr. Henderson, I saw you in the video. My family and I are incredibly grateful for how you stepped in." "It was the only decent thing to do," Henderson said brusquely. "But gratitude isn't going to fix the systemic problem that allowed this to happen. I've been watching Starlight's response. A suspension, a generic apology on Twitter. It's crisis management 1201, and it's not enough. This isn't about one rogue employee, doctor. It's about a corporate culture that either tolerates or fails to adequately train against this kind of prejudice. They are liable for the actions of their employee and for the public defamation of your son." Alistair was silent, listening. "Your son was defamed. He was humiliated. He was subjected to emotional distress right before one of the most important moments of his young career." Henderson continued, his voice resonating with legal authority. "A simple settlement and a quiet firing won't change a thing. but you have leverage right now that is immense. The court of public opinion has already ruled in your favor. We can make this hurt. We can force real institutional change." He paused. "I'd like to offer my firm's services to your family. Pro bono. This one is too important to be about the money." Alistair Hayes, a man who dealt in life and death decisions, recognized a pivotal moment when he saw one. Henderson wasn't just an ambulance chaser. He was an advocate, an ally, who saw the bigger picture. "Mr. Henderson," Alistair said, a new resolve hardening his voice, "when can you be in my office?" The battle lines were being drawn. This was no longer just about a viral video. It was about to become a calculated legal war. The Hayes family, with a powerful legal gladiator now in their corner, were not going to settle for a quiet apology. They were going to demand a reckoning. For Jamal, and for every other person who had ever been judged by the color of their skin while just trying to get from one place to another. The internal investigation at Starlight Airlines was swift and brutal, driven by the merciless pressure of a global PR nightmare. The company's stock had taken a small but noticeable dip. Lifelong loyalty members were posting photos of their cut-up Starlight credit cards. Rival airlines were subtly capitalizing on the chaos, with ads emphasizing their commitment to diversity and respect. David Chen was interviewed for 3 hours by a team from Human Resources and the corporate legal department. He recounted the event dispassionately, but his testimony was damning for Brenda. He confirmed that she had not followed standard procedure, which required a calm, discreet verification of ID before any escalation. He described her as irate and unprofessional. The investigation then turned to Brenda Matthews's employment history, and what they found transformed the narrative from a single catastrophic error in judgment into something far more sinister, a pattern of behavior. For 12 years, Brenda had been a mediocre employee. Her performance reviews were a landscape of consistency, never excellent, never poor enough to warrant termination. But digging deeper into the digital archives of customer feedback, a disturbing trend emerged. Over the past 5 years, there had been 7 informal complaints lodged against her. They hadn't been serious enough to trigger a formal HR review, often just emails to customer service that were logged and forgotten. But read together, they painted a chilling picture. A complaint from a Sikh man in a turban who was aggressively questioned about his bulky headwear at the gate. A complaint from a Latina woman who was accused of not speaking English well enough to understand boarding instructions, though she was a fluent university professor. 2 separate complaints from black passengers who felt they were spoken to with a disrespectful and dismissive tone regarding baggage queries. A complaint from an Asian family who Brenda had loudly and incorrectly accused of trying to cut the line. Each incident on its own was minor enough to be dismissed as a misunderstanding or a customer having a bad day. But compiled into a single file, they revealed a clear and undeniable pattern of bias against passengers of color. Brenda wasn't just having one bad day. She was a serial offender whose prejudice had been allowed to fester unchecked within the Starlight system. She was a time bomb, and Jamal Hayes had been the one she finally exploded on, with the whole world watching. This file became the cornerstone of Robert Henderson's strategy. He knew that any legal action would likely end in a confidential settlement, which was not his goal. His goal was public systemic change. When Starlight's lawyers reached out to him for an initial conversation, he didn't start with a monetary figure. "Before we discuss any potential damages for the Hayes family," Henderson stated coolly in a conference call, "we need to talk about the discovery process. We will be requesting the complete employment file of Miss Brenda Matthews, including all performance reviews, commendations, and most importantly, all prior customer complaints, formal or informal. There was a palpable silence on the other end of the line. The airline's lawyers knew exactly what was in that file. Releasing it would be corporate suicide, providing irrefutable proof that Starlight had harbored a problematic employee for years. It would turn their isolated incident defense to dust. Furthermore, Henderson continued pressing his advantage. "We will be deposing her supervisor, Mr. David Chen, and his superiors to understand what training and oversight procedures were in place and why they so clearly failed." He had them. He had them cornered, and they knew it. The threat of a public, messy discovery process that would air all of their dirty laundry was far more terrifying than a lawsuit. The karma that was hitting Brenda Matthews was now ricocheting and striking the corporation that had, through its own negligence, enabled her. For Brenda, the world had shrunk to the four walls of her small, lonely house in a Chicago suburb. Her suspension was now an unpaid leave of absence. Her friends from work had stopped texting. The neighborhood kids pointed at her house when they walked by. She had to delete all of her social media, but the poison still seeped in. Her son called her from his father's house, confused. "Mom, kids at school are saying you're a famous racist. Is it true?" She tried to defend herself, to explain the stress, the flat tire, her ex-husband, the pressure. But her excuses sounded hollow, even to her own ears. The video didn't show her flat tire or her heartache. It showed a screeching woman filled with hate and a dignified boy who refused to break. The final blow came in a cold, clinical letter delivered by courier. It was from Starlight Airlines' legal department. Due to the findings of their internal investigation and her violation of multiple company policies, her employment was terminated effective immediately. Her 12 years of service were erased. Her health insurance, her flight benefits, her pension plan all gone. She was alone, unemployed, and infamous. The hard karma was no longer an abstract concept. It was the empty pantry, the looming mortgage payment, and the suffocating silence of a life she had single-handedly destroyed. She had wanted to put a boy in his place, and in doing so, she had lost her own place in the world entirely. The battle for accountability was not fought in a courtroom, but in the sterile, soundproofed environment of a corporate conference room on the 45th floor of a downtown skyscraper. It was Starlight Airlines' home turf, a space designed to project power and intimidate. 3 of the airline's top lawyers, clad in impeccably tailored suits, sat on one side of a polished mahogany table, a fortress of legal might. On the other side, represented by a single high-definition screen, was the calm, resolute face of Robert Henderson. The lead counsel for Starlight, a man named Marcus Thorne, began with an air of magnanimous concession. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "let me be clear. The events at O'Hare were unacceptable, a complete failure of our standards. We are prepared to offer the Hayes family a sincere apology and a substantial settlement to help young Mr. Hayes move past this unfortunate incident." He slid a folder across the table toward the camera. "We are proposing a settlement of $2 million contingent on a standard non-disclosure agreement." Robert Henderson didn't even glance at the folder on the screen. He let the offer hang in the air for a long, uncomfortable moment, the silence itself a form of rejection. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson finally said, his voice devoid of emotion, "you seem to be under the impression that you are dealing with an incident that can be erased with a bank transfer. You are mistaken. You are dealing with a public act of racial defamation perpetrated by an employee your company negligently supervised against the minor child of my clients." He paused, letting the legal weight of his words settle. "The Hayes family doesn't need your money." The three lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. This was not going according to their script. "What they want," Henderson continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly, "is accountability. What they want is to ensure that no other child, no other person of color ever has to endure what Jamal went through at the hands of your airline. So let's stop talking about cash and start talking about change." This was the masterstroke. In a private call the night before, Alistair and Lena Hayes had made their own position perfectly clear to Henderson. "Robert, we didn't raise our son to be a victim or a lottery winner," Lena had said, her voice trembling with a mother's fierce protective instinct. "We raised him to be a man of character. This experience will be a part of his story forever. We want that part of the story to mean something more than just a quiet payday." Alistair had agreed, adding, "This isn't just about Brenda Matthews. She's a symptom. The disease is the corporate culture that let her fester. We want treatment for the disease." Henderson now channeled their conviction. Over the next hour, he laid out their terms not as requests, but as non-negotiable demands. The public apology from the CEO. The complete overhaul of training by an independent, respected firm. And the final audacious demand: the program would be publicly named the Hayes Initiative, and its oversight board would include the family themselves. Marcus Thorne almost laughed. "That's absurd. We can't give a civilian family oversight of internal corporate policy. It's unprecedented." "The situation is unprecedented," Henderson countered instantly. "And gentlemen, I do suggest you reconsider your position, because if we cannot reach an agreement, my next step will be to file a lawsuit and begin the discovery process. My first subpoena will be for the complete unredacted employment file of Ms. Brenda Matthews, all 12 years of it. I have a feeling the producers at 60 Minutes would find her 7 prior unaddressed complaints of biased behavior to be a very compelling story. Your isolated incident narrative wouldn't survive the first commercial break." The bluff, if it even was one, was perfect. The threat of exposing their long-term negligence was an existential one. The room fell silent. The fortress had been breached. The power had shifted. They conceded. For Brenda Matthews, the news of the settlement was not delivered by a lawyer, but absorbed through the cold glow of her phone screen. She was no longer just suspended. She was fired, the notification delivered via a cold, impersonal courier package. The termination letter cited gross misconduct and violation of company values. 12 years of her life erased in a single paragraph. The infamy was inescapable. She was a pariah in the only industry she knew. After dozens of failed applications, the reality set in her career was over. The house with its mortgage she could no longer afford went up for sale. She packed her life into cardboard boxes, haunted by the echoes of a life she had torched with her own hands. Her new home was a third-floor apartment overlooking a dumpster, her new job stocking shelves on the graveyard shift at a sprawling 24-hour superstore. Her new life was a world of harsh fluorescent lights, the chemical smell of floor wax, and the profound ache of a body not used to manual labor. The anonymity was both a blessing and a curse. No one knew her as Starlight Brenda, but she was also no one at all. Just another tired figure in a faded blue vest moving boxes of cereal and canned soup in the dead of night. One brutally cold Tuesday morning around 3 a.m., she sat in the desolate employee break room, massaging her sore back. She scrolled numbly through a news app on her phone when a headline caught her eye. A year later, Starlight's Hayes Initiative sets new industry standard. Her breath caught in her throat. The article was glowing. It detailed a 40% drop in customer complaints and a significant rise in employee morale. It talked about the comprehensive bias training that went beyond role-playing to foster genuine understanding. There was a photo of Starlight's CEO shaking hands with a poised and confident young man who was no longer a boy. Jamal Hayes, now a celebrated first-year student at Juilliard, looked directly at the camera, his eyes filled with a maturity far beyond his years. The article ended with a quote from him. "The goal was never to punish but to improve," Jamal said. "My parents and I knew that for change to be real, it had to be structural. We wanted to make sure that travel is a safe and respectful experience for everyone, regardless of what they look like or where they come from." Sitting there, under the buzzing, flickering light, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee, Brenda felt the last of her justifications crumble into dust. The self-pity, the lingering anger at being victimized by the internet, it all dissolved in a wave of devastating, crystalline clarity. The hard karma wasn't just losing her job or her house. It was this. It was the crushing cosmic irony of it all. In a fit of bitter, prejudiced rage, she had tried to diminish a young black man, to put him in his place and deny him his. Instead, she had inadvertently handed him a platform. Her ugliness had become the fertile ground from which a legacy of positive, lasting change had grown. His name was now etched onto a program celebrating the very respect she had denied him. She had sought to make him powerless, and she had made him powerful. She had sought to make him small, and she had made his cause monumental. She dropped her phone onto the grimy table, the screen still glowing with his face. The true punishment wasn't her own ruin. It was the unbearable knowledge of his triumph, a victory born from her own failure as a human being. And that was a sentence she would have to serve for the rest of her life. The story of Jamal Hayes and gate agent Brenda isn't just a fleeting viral moment. It's a powerful reminder of what can happen when one person's prejudice collides with the collective conscience of a connected world. It shows us that true karma isn't a mystical force. It's the logical, often brutal consequence of our own actions. Jamal's dignity in the face of public humiliation and the courage of the passengers who chose not just to watch, but to bear witness transformed a moment of ugliness into a catalyst for profound industry-wide change. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of accountability and the importance of standing up for what's right, please help us share it. Give this video a like, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that matter. By amplifying these narratives, we can all play a part in writing a better ending.